You are listening to Eastmans Fly Cast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new podcast for you. So this week on FlyCast, I have on Kevin Estela from FieldCraft Survival. So Kevin is a big part of FieldCraft Survival over there. He has a part in the podcast and wears multiple other hats, but he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's also written a book, 101 Skills You Need to Survive in the Woods, and he's got a bunch of experience on the water, both up in Alaska and using rafts and big float trips, and also on western trout streams. So this is an interesting podcast. So much of the time I'm just chasing adventure, and I can lose sight of the details or the safety. Like the truth of the matter is these western rivers are dangerous, and whether it's rapids or falling in the water in the cold, slipping in when you're wading, grizzly bears like in Alaska and on these Montana rivers. There's just so much that comes into play, and we love to adventure and we love to push our limits, but we also need to be cognizant of the dangers and prepared for them as well. So as I've gotten older, I've been better at preparing for these dangers, because the longer you do things, the more things that can happen or will happen to me and to all of us. So I think it's a very important conversation, and it's a fun one with Kevin. So we're just talking about safety, and it definitely brings it to the forefront of my mind. Like lately, I've been fishing this big river with a bunch of cubic inch, and the hydraulics in that thing are so scary. Like even being in a drift boat, you get in the wrong hydraulic, and it just pull the side of your boat down underwater, and so many other dangers as we're on the rivers. And so we just need to keep a clear head. And a big way I prepare for bow hunting dangers on these big adventure hunts is to look at the hunts and to look at the possible dangers and what I do in that situation, for lightning, for bears, and I work up a system for handling all these dangers. And the same thing with fly fishing. Fly fishing in the water is just as dangerous and just as adventurous on some of these new waters. I'm putting in on floats that I've never been on, rivers I've never been on, and I read up as much as I can and try to be prepared, but things can change, and so it can be dangerous out there. And so just a real important conversation, and happy to have it, and thanks to Kevin for taking the time and being on the podcast. So let's get into this thing. Eastmans Fly Cast, Kevin Estela. I'm Brian Barney, your host. Here we go. Okay, I'm live. I've got Kevin from FieldCraft Survival on today. So, Kevin, just can't thank you enough for taking the time and joining me for a podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if any of the listeners are expecting the Irish Kevin, I'm the other Kevin that works at FieldCraft.
That can be strange when you have two people with the same names. Then you have to either go by the last names or nicknames.
Yeah, and I think we've got Irish Kevin and we got Filipino Kevin. So I mean, it is what it is. We'll figure it out eventually, but there'll be a learning curve until then, and I'll start running over when there's long gun questions, and Kevin Owens will start running over when there's questions about outdoor survival. So until then, we'll make do.
Yeah, good on you guys. Well, yeah, I'm glad to have you on the Eastmans Fly Cast today, just to talk about some of the dangers, like fly fishing the West or fly fishing anywhere. It's such an adventure, and we go attack it, but a lot of times we're not thinking about the repercussions of our actions, or not thinking about things that can go wrong, and it just happens so quick on the water, on the river. So I thought you'd be the perfect guest for it.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you, like, COVID was a great opportunity for me to get on the river every single day in 2020, pretty much from March until June. I was a high school history teacher for many years, and the combination of distance learning and my proximity to living next to one of the trophy trout rivers in Connecticut made it so that I could get out every single day. So I've got a lot of experience with cold water and seeing things, and just case studies from buddies that responded on different search and rescue teams, police departments, fire departments, that I'm happy to share some of the things that what went wrong and how it could have been prevented.
Oh, I love it. Well, and this is great too. So you're over at FieldCraft Survival. What's your position over there?
At FieldCraft Survival, my technical position is director of training, but I'm also a writer. So I do some of the writing for our new journal, as well as, a content provider, filming short videos, and kind of a jack of all trades. I might step into the retail store and help out those guys selecting the right gear that we should carry here based on experience. And that's pretty much how we all are over here. We're like multi-tools, Swiss Army knives. One day we're the bottle cap or we're the bottle opener. Another day we're the saw. So we do a little bit of everything.
Good for you. Well, and you are the author of a book that's perfectly suited for this conversation, 101 Skills You Need to Survive in the Woods.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, so being next to that river in Connecticut, and I spend a lot of time in the water in the off seasons as well, in the summer, but like really right now in the winter, in the spring, I spend a lot of time outdoors. And so like there's so many dangers out there. And I just feel like even me, I go into it a bit naive. So like I guess where we can get started is in a boat, like drifting these western rivers. A lot of times, I feel like we're explorers. Like we want to explore new sections of the river. And in today's day and age in fishing, like the more you're able to go for it and send a boat down a long drift or down a drift that has like some technical whitewater, like the better fishing you can find. So, what do you think some of the keys are to keeping boat safety?
So I mentioned this with Ike Eastman. I said how, as sportsmen, we always want to plan for success, right? We always want to plan for that picture perfect moment when we catch that record trout or steelhead or whatever it may be. We're planning for that moment. We want to make sure that all of our kit is squared away. So when we take that photo, we don't look like we're like a gypsy camp with stuff just dangling off of us and whatnot. But it's so easy to get wrapped up into that plan of success that we don't plan for failure. And with the growing trend of going more minimalist with all of our gear, right? Like I used to start, like when I first started fishing, I carried pretty much everything inside of my fishing vest. And now the trend is to move away from fishing vests and get into these micro rigs that just carry the bare essentials. But when you start getting away from carrying bare essentials, you limit, when you only carry the bare essentials, you get away from having room and capacity to carry equipment in the worst case scenario, which could be a dump in the water. Now, if you dump in the water, I mean, you've got a very, very limited amount of time, especially in cold water, to correct that problem, right? To properly swim, to navigate the rapids in like an active swimming position with your feet in front of you and your chest up, and then to get to the riverbank, dry off, maybe get a fire going and preserve the body heat that you're rapidly losing. So I think one of the number one considerations is planning for that emergency where it involves an accidental dunking, and have a ditch bag within arm's reach at all times, right? Something that if you were to start going over, you're connected to it, or it's within arm's reach where you're going to grab it on your way out of that boat in case of that emergency dunking.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Yeah, it happens so quick in a boat, and you're right, we don't prepare ourselves for worst case scenarios, but I know like in my backcountry hunting, I'm always trying to look at it, and I'm trying to look at the challenges and how I'll overcome that, and whether that's, extreme backcountry or that's gnarly lightning storms in the high country, like I have this safety protocol, and I almost miss that fishing, but like you have to be on the ball. So, in these drift boats going down these western rivers, I mean, one wrong spin, one wrong go, and you can be out of the front of the boat. And so, yeah, I think being prepared for that or realizing that can happen, I think is crucial. And right now, coming into spring runoff, like all these western rivers, they're going to be running high water and big flows, and that makes it a lot tougher to pull off on the edge of the river as the riverbank just comes up into the grass and into the trees and things of that nature, and it's moving so quick. And so, like, I think as far as going down the river, I think it's important, like modern drift boats, they have a place to stand where it holds you inside like a casting bow, and they have them for the back person and for the front person. And I know when I'm rowing people down, I never let like a leg out of that thing. Like if you're standing in it, it has to be two legs standing up where it can hold you where you're supported, because it is just one twist of the boat and you could send somebody out and not only be in trouble in the water, but also like you mentioned, keeping your feet downriver and thinking quick, because you could hit your head pretty easily going out of the boat too.
Oh my God. And that happens so fast, like you were saying. And if you think about it, I mean, as sportsmen, we wake up early, we get on the water before sunrise usually. Many times we might have a few drinks in us the night before with our buddies or whatever. So we're definitely stacking the odds against us by limiting the amount of sleep that we have and consuming beverages like that, if that's really your choice. And at some point you realize the booze isn't worth it, and you'd rather wake up early and get on the river and beat those guys that are like the old version of you. But things could happen so quickly, right? And I think one of the important steps in preparing for any of these emergencies is just understanding that there are multiplier effects. Fatigue is a multiplier effect. Cold is a multiplier effect, right? Like I think all of us have been on the river where we've gotten our hands wet and we're trying to tie knots, and it's a lot easier to tie when your hands are warm and you have that dexterity versus cold, right? So the cold can amplify, or I should say, can greatly reduce your ability to perform tasks efficiently. And if you think about where you are in a drift boat, right, you're moving on water, you are cold, you're possibly wet, you're possibly in the wind, you might be fatigued. I mean, there's many things that get stacked against you, and we can't forget, like, yes, we're doing this in terms of recreation, but at any moment, our recreational trip could turn into something that could be potentially life-threatening. So, I mean, granted, we don't want to, be the person that's all doom and gloom, but we also don't want to be willy-nilly about, hey, if this happens, well, what are you going to do? Well, my plan is hope. I hope it doesn't happen. And hope is not a plan. That's something that we say in the combative world. Like, hope's not a plan. You should have an actual plan just in case.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, like that being cold. I have never been so cold as on the river. Like it's damp and that 34 degrees, 36 degrees and raining at the Pacific Northwest out there. And when you put in for a drift or you put in for a go, you never really know with the flows. You have an idea how many hours it can take, but that can easily double. And you're, you may not feel like you're in a wilderness or the middle of nowhere, but really, you're a long ways from your put in and a long ways for your takeout, and you got 5 hours. And if it pours down raining, I've seen so many guys, like even in the summertime, that don't bring a rain jacket with them. It looks like blue skies, looks like nothing's going to happen, and all of a sudden the megastorm rolls in on you, just dark gray skies, and then just unleashes, hail and rain. And lightning can be a real danger on the river too. I've rode out some gnarly storms where you got to get off the water, you got to get to the edge, and you got to ride out this storm until it's done and then float down. But I mean, you could be 4 hours from your vehicle. That's a long time if you have damp clothes, or like when I'm floating in the Pacific Northwest, like I always have a dry bag, and in that dry bag I got an extra puffy jacket, I got an extra couple layers just in case I do get wet or I do spill, that's in a dry bag and good to go. And like preparing for that, like I've never been as miserable as like an 8-10 hour float in the rain and 34-36 degrees. Like that is cold, bone chilling cold, so like it's any way you can prevent that. And I actually like oaring in the cold. I feel bad for the guy fishing because I can keep warm by pushing on the sticks.
Yeah, back in 2016 I did over 100-mile float trip with my buddy Mark Knapp.
Wow.
We were on the Sag River in on the north slope of the Brooks Range in Alaska.
I've been on the Sag River. Yeah.
Oh my God, what a gorgeous place! I'm dying to go back there, and I'm hoping at some point we can recreate the awesome trip that we had here at FieldCraft.
Did you guys get into him like the Arctic char in there?
Oh, did we ever? We actually, Mark, who's a resident of Alaska, he has a couple buddies that work for Fish and Wildlife up there, and one of the things that we did on this trip, we tested out a knife that Mark made. But then we also were assigned to go to certain like mountain ponds and see what kind of fish we could catch up there to do like almost like a biological study and report back to these biologists at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So we verified that in a couple of these ponds that there were actual Arctic char and not just Dolly Varden. We caught Arctic char, lake trout. We caught some amazing fish. We ate like kings with fresh fish on that trip. We didn't spot a caribou that was legal for me to shoot, so I was out the money on that one, but it was totally worth it for the experience to see that wilderness. But that story ties into yours because Mark was the one paddling our solo raft, and I sat on the front basically on like a makeshift seat that we made out of our bags, and I was getting splashed left and right. And I had the best rain gear in the world, but the wetness of the rain gear combined with the cold wind, it chilled me to the bone. Like I've never been that close to hypothermia in my life. And we were taking turns boiling hot water in his jet boil and then filling my titanium canteen, putting it inside my jacket and warming myself up. And we actually pulled off at one point. I was like, dude, Mark, I'm not like a lightweight. I know myself. I run warm. I've never been this cold in my life. I gotta stop warm, do push-ups, do something. I gotta warm up. It was bad. And it was as simple as adding two ingredients, water and wind. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't raining. It was just the splash and the wind. And what probably could have helped me was another layer, like a poncho, but I don't want to have to emergency swim in a poncho. You know what I mean? So like you're kind of weighing the options. Do you go for more water resistance, but more of a liability if you go in the drink? Or do you say, well, I'm going to go without it, but suffer through the cold? And in this case, I suffered through the cold.
Oh, that is brutal, Kevin. I've been there. Yeah, that is gnarly. Yeah, that it's actually like SAG is the short for it, Sagias or Sagiris. But yeah, that I've been lucky enough to caribou hunt a couple times up there off the North Slope, and then also did a big 100-mile drift on another river on the other side of the Brooks. But yeah, that place is. I know what you mean about that bone-chilling cold, because even when I hunt it in August with my bow and arrow, like it is bone-chilling cold there. That 36 degrees and damp. I know exactly what you're talking about. So yeah,
And that's
I
the
think
timeline that we were there. It was August.
Yeah.
It was August.
It's crazy. Yeah, winter shows up early up there, and good on you too. Like I think a big part of avoiding some major catastrophe is like admitting to yourself like there's a problem. Like a lot of times you sitting in the front of the boat could have let that male ego take over and say, oh, I'm warm, I'll make it. But you knew you were on the edge and you had to stop and do some push-ups or do some jumping jacks or get that blood flowing again. And I think that's an important point because, yeah, I mean, in that front of the boat, you could just keep your mouth shut and pretty soon, you're hypothermic and you're into a real problem with your core body temperature being too low. So I think it's important to like always self-monitor yourself too and how you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things that was brought up that it surprised me, like I didn't even think about it. My buddy Mark is a skilled outdoorsman, and he was my makeshift guide up there. Like he was a guide, but he wasn't technically guiding me. We were just going with a couple of buddies. But one of my good friends said to me, he said, "Hey Kev, what happens if Mark goes down?" And I was like, oh my God, I never even contemplated that, because again, we're planning for success, right? We want to think like, okay, Mark and I are going to travel through the wilderness, no problem. But he easily could break an ankle. He easily could have a heart attack, right? I mean, people in great shape could have a freak medical emergency that it has never happened before. And now here's a person who has all this experience in the great outdoors, who was, my makeshift guide. He goes down, and now I have to fend for myself. So that really changed the way that I planned the gear that I carried. I carried a portable emergency locator beacon that is about the size of a pack of cigarettes in a chest pack, and I never left that. I made it a point never to leave the tent without my SIG 10mm pistol. I always had a small emergency kit on me, but then I had that in the drink bag, my go bag. And that was, again, if we got separated, I knew in that bag I had a metal canteen. I had some food reserves. In that pack, I had enough to make a basic shelter and just wait out help. Or walk to help. If I knew, like based on the map that we were using, if I knew that the road was 5 miles away, I would take my time and get to that road. So I think that's another thing that sportsmen need to hear is, yes, your guide might be the total stud, fisherman, hunter, whatever, but if it's just you and a guide, there is a chance that your guide goes down and you might have to fend for yourself. So you can't get lured into this false sense of security that everything's going to be all right. I'm sure your guide is qualified and things will be okay, but just be prepared. There's no harm in preparing ahead of time just in case something freak like that happens.
Oh, man, that's a great point. Like, you should always know the plan, and that's whether or not you're in Alaska or in the States. You should always know your takeout, where you put in, where the vehicles are, and how to get to safety. Because, yeah, I mean, you go the wrong direction up there, you could be walking for over 100 miles of bog. Like, you can't make a mistake. And same thing, like when I did a big 100-mile float, like my takeout was a place where the plane was going to pick me up on a gravel bed, and if I kept going down that river, I mean, you're talking hundreds of miles if I can even get down through there. So I think that's an important part of always knowing the plan, always knowing the put in and the takeout, and knowing what that takeout looks like. Like, I know going down in a boat, we're going in all these new spots, and if you don't have it marked on your Onyx or marked on your map, like, you can fly by the takeout and all of a sudden, now you're 10 miles away from your truck, or now you're putting on, you're going past a takeout on a river that may go into some rapids or may go into a feature that you don't want to get into. So I think you're right. Like, we can't put it in autopilot, even if our buddy's done it before, even if our buddy knows. Like, get all those details straight, like, before you put on. And it's just preparing yourself because bad things happen quick, and if you're not prepared and not paying attention, like, the devil's in the details. And if you don't know where you're headed, or like you say, your buddy goes down or you get separated, like you're at the mercy of your own survival skills at that point, and your own knowledge that you downloaded, before the float or whatever. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and you better be honest, right? Like, that's one of the things that ego kills outdoorsmen, and dishonesty kills outdoorsmen too, right? Dishonesty in that when someone says, well, what if you have to spend the night? Oh, I've done it before. And, well, what if you've never really done it? But you're just saying that to avoid embarrassment, right? If that type of thing would embarrass you. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with your fishing buddy, hunting buddy, whatever it may be. If you've never processed an animal, don't take the lead processing an animal. If unless you want some, jacked up looking tenderloins, you want to make sure that you're completely honest, right? Full disclosure, because that dishonesty will kill you. Did you see what the takeout looked like? Oh yeah, I did. Don't worry. And meanwhile, you didn't look at it. And now, like you mentioned, you've gone past it, or you take out prematurely. And next thing you know, the bush plane comes, goes, and you not only have to call them back, you have to pay for that return flight. When we did that trip, I don't want to linger too much on that one because there's so many other, great case studies. But when we did that trip, we drove the Dawson Highway all the way past the pump station to the Happy Valley landing strip, and we saw what the takeout looked like. And then we drove all the way back to I forgot what the name of the airstrip was, but then we launched from there. To the Sag Lake up in the mountains, hiked it down, and then put it from there. So yeah, that honesty component. I mean, let's face it, fishermen tend to be a little bit dishonest. I mean, I've done it a few times. First off as a 9-inch, brookie, and the next, it's 19 inches. But in that case, like, you just have to be honest with yourself because it really is a critical component of trip planning.
Yeah, I like that. That's not talked about enough, is being honest with you and your party members. And I love that river, by the way. I could talk all day on that river, but we will talk about some other scenarios. But yeah, that river's a beautiful, like, I want to those Arctic char get in there thick, and it's about timing that run. And I think that run is more towards the end of August, beginning of September. So I missed it when I was there. I really wanted to catch some, and I drifted it a bunch and fished for them, and caught a bunch of graylings. But I think I was a touch early on the run, so I definitely want to go back. But another danger of that river, you mentioned your 10 mil. is bear danger. And that's another thing where you can pull off anywhere on the side of that river and there can be a grizz bear in the brush. In fact, I floated it multiple times and I've seen multiple grizz bears down there while hunting caribou, and especially like bear safety is real. And up in Alaska, it's at the forefront of your mind because you see them. They're up there, and there's those caribou harvests, those gut piles, or where somebody processed one that was killed with archery tackle off the haul road. Those bears, like, that's the worst case scenario. And every year, I live in the Madison Valley in Ennis, Montana, just south of Bozeman. So we have a bunch of grizzly bears around here. And then I hunt black bears with my bow, spot and stock. And so, I see 35 to 50 a season, try to look for a big boar, make a stock on them. So I get real comfortable being around bears, but that pistol safety, it's not a given to be good with that pistol. And under an intense amount of adrenaline, under that fog of adrenaline, it's a different beast. So it's not just carrying that pistol and thinking you're protected. Like, it's practicing with that thing. It's the same way as you build a shooting process with your bow or with your rifle. You need to build with your pistol, and you need to run rounds with it and gain confidence with it and know the right plan of action, because you get under that fog of adrenaline of having a bear coming into camp and you're yelling at it, and all of a sudden it's charging. Like, and I had a case, I arrowed a black bear a couple years ago where I snuck up, waited for my shot, put a perfect arrow into him at like 30 yards, and he wasn't charging me, but the country filtered him down to my position. So he spun around and bit at the arrow and roared, and then ran right down at me, right at my position. I had to defend my position. And it was when I realized my shortcomings with that pistol is where I shot 9 times, and I grazed that bear once and hit him twice. And luckily I had an arrow through his lungs. I came out unscathed, but it was a wake-up call for me that, hey, if I'm going to hunt black bears with my bow, or if I'm going to go up to Alaska and float around all these grizzly bears, if I'm going to trust my life to that 10 mil pistol with those 15 shots in it, I better get damn good with that thing,
Yeah, well, coming from Connecticut, we're not allowed to do any bow hunting with a handgun. We can't possess a handgun while we're bow hunting. I think that's just a hilarious, rule. But we actually just this morning we filmed a video for one of the courses that we're teaching, where it's force on force essentially, and it was based on an old video done by Manal and Dana Nefanta, one of Bruce Lee's original students, that talked about action versus reaction and the concept of reactionary gap. And granted, we had 300 Win Mag rifles with us, but we weren't carrying the 300 Win Mag rifles in areas that were considered non-hunting, right, or bow hunting only. Like, we couldn't keep them chambered, or else we would have been breaking the law. So the pistols were all that we had. But there were a couple times where when we went out, we were like, okay, let's make sure that we, if we had like I carried a pistol in a chest rig, I made sure that I had easy access to it. Like, I already had my hand on it when we were walking to get water, because I didn't want to have to try to fumble and try to find the grip of the pistol as I was carrying, a canteen to the water. I wanted to walk with my hand on it, so the draw was already there. You know what I mean? Like, so there's little nuances like that we can take from, say, like the combatives world and apply it to defending yourself in the great outdoors, because ultimately it's protection. So if you can already have one beat, like a half beat on whatever threat is coming at you, then you don't have to earn that beat in time while that threat is already moving and you're reacting to it, right? Because action will almost always beat reaction.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Well, and another part of that is just like having your head on a swivel and paying attention. Like, that's what bear safety is all about to me, is seeing the threat before it becomes a threat. And those bears, they're fight or flight. Inside 100 yards, they fight or flight. Like, that's the danger zone. So if I find myself inside 100 yards of a bear that I don't want to yell at that bear right away. My first instinct is to sneak out of there and never let him know I'm there.
Yep.
Now, if that bear,
go ahead.
but if that bear notices my presence and starts walking towards me, or I have to make myself known, then I want to make it known I'm a human. Then I want to wave my arms. I want to yell at it. That's my first warning. But as I'm doing that, like you said, I don't have my pistol in my backpack. It's not still in my holster. It's at the ready. It's pointed right at that bear as I'm shouting at it as I'm getting ready, because my next move is a warning shot. Or
Correct.
if it takes a charge at me, my next move is to put a bullet in it, you know? And so like being prepared for those situations, because they happen really quick. And whether you're on the water or it's a grizzly bear, it's a different thought process when you get under that adrenaline rush. You don't think clearly, and so you want to be prepared for it and ready for it. So I just love what you said about like reactionary or actionary. I think that's so important, is to be ready for that and have your head on a swivel. So you see that bear a ways off. Like if you see him a couple hundred yards, you can just give him a wide berth and give him his space, and you don't even have conflict. You don't have that fight or flight, So I think a lot of times you can avoid that by just being aware of your surroundings and paying attention.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people need to understand is sometimes if a bear smells you, it's enough of a warning to it to just get the hell out of Dodge, right? Like it's something that it's not familiar with. Right? Maybe if you're out in a remote area, it smells something foreign, you get winded, and guess what? That bear is gone. But you really have to worry when it does smell you and it now starts approaching you. There's a saying that every bear is an individual. We can assume, all right, well, if I do this, this bear is going to do this. Well, every bear is an individual, right? And certain bears have tendencies that other bears don't. I think what's really important is what people need to hear. When you're trying to yell at a bear, you need to yell human words. You shouldn't yell like a growl, because that could be misinterpreted, right? It might assume that you're another animal. But if you make human sounds, like that's why when I hear people say, "Get away, bear, get away," like there's nothing in nature that sounds like the English language. I think people need to realize that they shouldn't growl at an animal, because those animals are used to hearing growling, and they may perceive it as an additional threat. So that's yet another bear safety, practice. But like you said, your first shot might be in the ground, and it better be a warranted shot, because you don't want to have to defend yourself later on in a courtroom, right, for illegally discharging a firearm. Like if it was a legitimate threat, it's warranted, right? But if you just start firing rounds at something that's not perceived as a threat, then you might have bigger problems.
Yeah, that's right. You understand bears very well, Kevin. So I actually had that scenario on a bear. I've been charged a couple times while hunting them. You always it's the most dangerous when you get an arrow in those bears. And I had another one that I stuck with an arrow, and he disappeared down below me, and then I didn't hear him keep going, and so I knocked another arrow. And like maybe 20 seconds later, he was running up the hill towards me, and he was making a death run, but he didn't know I was there. And I'm so conditioned, like for elk, to stop him at full draw, for a buck, meh, and for a bear, you huff at him, and I huffed at that bear, and he pinned his ears back and came right at me as soon as I huffed. So you're right about making human sounds at him, When I huffed at that bear, he just knew I was the one who stung him and came right at me. And I actually, like from 5 yards away, I put another arrow in him, and it went in like I always thought I'd shoot him in the front of the chest charging, but they really charge with their heads down. And so I ended up hitting them, behind the head, in the neck, and down through the brisket that way. But man, it was close quarters.
Damn, what a story. Holy crap.
Oh, some wild encounters with those things, but yeah, so that's the bears. Can definitely run into those, especially around these western states and around Alaska. But a lot of those dangers in the river are just with that. We take for granted the current and the hydraulics. That water is so powerful, and not only that, but the river's always changing. Like I know fishing in the Pacific Northwest, like those flows of those rivers will go from 3,000 CFS to 20,000 CFS, and it'll wash old growth trees down in the river. And so you can be going down a stretch that you floated last year, and it's totally changed and might have the whole river going right into a log jam that you got to portage around. And there's no signage, there's nobody that tells you, you just got to go down and be aware. So like the same as you're aware of your surroundings with bears, you really have to be aware of your surroundings in that boat and rowing down a river. And so it's not always avoiding the rock right in front of you, but if you can hear loud riffle, or you can hear like a bunch of commotion, it's always good to scout like those hydraulics, or scout those big rapids before you go down them. So when I'm floating new rivers, I'm looking for a big drop, or I'm listening for it. And when I see it, I'll pull that boat over, and then I'll go hike down, and I'll go look at that rapid and try to find my line. Because once you're on the edge of the rapid in the boat, you got to make quick decisions, and you may have set yourself up on the wrong side of it. And so, like I just think it's so important to have your head on a swivel whenever rowing those boats, because you just never know what you're coming down into.
Right, and something that that changes every year is also what's called the hydrotopography, right? The terrain features under the riverbed itself. When we talk about 200 feet per second, cubic feet per second, 2,000 cubic feet per second, people need to understand it's like a garden hose, and a garden hose with, say, like a spray nozzle on the end. You can adjust that depending you can adjust the force of that flow on how much it's constricted, kind of like a choke tube on a shotgun. So it's still the same amount of water, but just getting pressurized. And you could have a very wide river become a very rapid river if there is something that gets in the path of that river. And every year with the changes in the river volume, it can dislodge rocks, right? Take away little pebbles underneath large rocks and move them. So for people that are used to wading in rivers, and they say, "Oh, I've waded this river forever," many of them will tell you, "Well, that rock used to be there. Now it's 15 feet further downriver." Well, you can imagine if you believe that river is always going to be exactly the same, it could lead you to a very, very dangerous scenario where you're wading and you're like, "Okay, I can go up to here and I'm only going to be up to my waist." But next thing you know, you go to step on a spot that you believed was secure, and now you're up over your waders, and now they're filling up with water, right? So there's so many scenarios like that where people get washed down. And there are certain rivers here in the Northeast, I should say here in the Northeast. I live in Utah now, but back in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic that require you to have some type of flotation device on you for that very reason. So I like the idea of having a PFD that has fishing pockets on it, right, for all your kit. And in cold weather, it actually provides a lot of warmth. So you won't look like a total dork. You'll just be really, really safe.
That's a good point. Yeah, so you're talking about the inflating vests that you pull a cord on them and they inflate. Those were really popular growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and I know saved one of my buddies' lives that flipped a boat over a diversion dam. That current can take over so quick, and those hydraulics are so powerful that I try to see it and stay away from it. Like there's a big diversion ditch. Like every year there's boats flipped around these western rivers, and there's a diversion ditch that sits over on the Big Hole, and it's an old dam that they blew out the center of it, but all the water floods right to the center, and then there's big rollers in it. And I've been in there, like that thing is sketchy, and I try to always just go to the right-hand side, stay out of the hydraulics, stay out of those big rollers and big current, and got through that thing and pulled over on the side of the river over there. And we pulled over on the side, and pretty soon I see another raft going down, and he went right for the center of that run, and he got on those rollers, and he almost made it over the roller, and the boat didn't quite make it over, and it slid backwards, and then water dumped in the raft and flipped it like right now, and he was in the water. His kid was in the water with all their gear, and so we pushed off, and we were able to get him in the boat and get him to safety, and luckily we were right by the takeout. But it's stuff like that. Those hydraulics can happen so quick, and so it's just being prepared and staying away from those things as much as you can. But the flotation device, I have to say, Kevin, I'm horrible at wearing mine. Like I don't. These western rivers, we get so comfortable that we're required to have them in the boat, but we're not required to wear them. And most of the time I'm comfortable. But where I do is the Pacific Northwest, is before any of those white waters that we have to go down that are class 3 and class 4. And some of that white water, you can only make it down at certain flows. Like it starts to get too low of flows, and then there's too many rocks showing and you can't make it through. Too high of flows is scary because it's boiling around at every rock in and through there. But I know before any of those rapids, we always pull over, get our flotation devices on, just in case, because those rafts can flip so easy, it just happens so quick. So I think you're right. In the inflatable ones, I think that would be smart to have that, especially when I'm fishing like those western rivers. Those coastal rivers are really dangerous out there. There's people that die every year. And so I think that's a good idea. And even in these western rivers, like I say, there's boats that flip every year in some of these places. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have it in some of the sketchier rivers, especially when it's high water and things of that nature. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and the high water scenario is one I've seen this play out. I don't know how many times. At high water, rapids get washed out, right? Like you don't see the rocks. All you see is just what appears on the surface level. It appears to be a slow moving, just big volume of water going down through a channel. But what the average person doesn't know is that there's a portion of that column of water moving downriver called the laminar flow. The laminar flow is below the surface of the water about 12 inches, right? 6 to 12 inches, where at the surface, I'm just going to throw out a miles per hour. Let's say that it's going at 3 miles per hour on the surface, 5 miles per hour. Well, 6 to 12 inches below the surface, that water might be booking at 15 to 20 miles per hour.
Wow.
So I've seen plenty of times, right? And it's called the laminar flow. And people should look it up because it's a real thing. Someone will step into high water thinking, oh, I could wade out there. It doesn't look too bad. And then they get their legs taken off from underneath them. Because at the top, it looks totally fine. But it's the equivalent of someone coming up from behind you and taking out your legs with a kick. You know what I mean? Like it's powerful stuff. But you usually can't see it because with high water, all the nastiness that's on the riverbank is getting washed down, so the river clarity isn't there. So you won't see things whipping by underneath the surface of the water. You'll only see what's on the top, and it's deceiving, and it's deadly as all hell.
Oh man, that's really interesting. I didn't know that, but as you're telling me about it, I can definitely relate to it in crossing water. And like I say, these western rivers, we're all in, trying to find big trout and trying to go where other people don't. And a lot of times wading, like I love having rubber is so slick on western rocks. I like to have the felt, or they've got this new system with these metal bars that'll grip really good, or even some spikes. But you got to be really careful wading. I mean, it's been a lifetime of me learning how to wade, and it's I've had a couple swims as well. I used to have this buddy that I'd fish with that I can't. He stands about 6'5" or 6'6", and I stand about 5'7". We cannot wade in the same places, but sometimes I think I can, And so like trying to follow him across a wade, like I remember going across this spot. And on the crossing, the water came up over my waders. Another point on waders is to always wear your wading belt. So that way your waders can't fill up as close. Like it cinches you around your waist and doesn't allow, all the water to go down to your feet or to fill up like a balloon where you're in an anchor and sink to the bottom. But I know going across, it got over top my waders. And so I knew that it was higher than I could wade, but I had to go back to make it to my truck, like when we finished the day. So I had got a little damp, and then going back, I must have got a little bit lower in the hole than I came across, and all of a sudden it's over my waders, and all of a sudden my feet stop touching the bottom, and I am swimming. I just had to swim with my rod and make it to the shore. Now, it wasn't like brutal winter conditions and not a gnarly river or anything, but that was a swim I had to take. But that wading takes experience, and it takes, like, once you're out in the middle of it, it's really tough to turn around and get back. And so wading's a skill that experience is the best teacher, but you don't want to go in too many times. Like, you don't want to make mistakes too many times, So I like to quarter downstream, and then I like to keep my feet moving. I like to not fight the current or try to be in control the whole time. I pick a line, and then I keep my feet moving in that downline trajectory. Seems to work the best for me, but every situation is different too.
Yeah, and being able to read the river will help you wade the river, right? Understanding how eddies work, understanding eddy lines, understanding, the different types of rapids that you're going to encounter. If it's a pillow where it really is just a rock that has water boiling over the top of it, that makes it look like a smooth pillow, versus a pocket that's going to have a hydraulic in it possibly. If you can understand how to read the river, you'll prevent yourself from going in the river like more than you want.
Spot on, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, assuming that you do have to swim, something that a lot of people should know is if you go over a drop, right? If you're swimming and you see a horizon line in front of you, it represents a drop. So think infinity pool, for those of you that haven't ever seen it from that perspective, like an infinity pool that looks like it goes on forever. If you see that in the river, you're going over a drop. When you go over that drop, you want to go into a cannonball, because there are plenty of people who will go off of that thinking, well, I'm just going to put my feet down, and then their feet get lodged and their body continues downriver with the force of the river, breaking their ankles, breaking their legs. It kills them, because you're not going to do, whether you're doing like a back extension or a crunch, you're not going to crunch up against the force of the river. But the best bet is, if you're going over a drop, ball up, preventing your extremities from getting stuck in a pocket somewhere, and hope that river is going to eventually push you out. It's a scary scenario. Like, you'll bruise your tailbone, you're going to get bumped up and scraped. You got to accept that. But you also have to keep a clear mind and look downriver. You will find spots where it is time to go active. It's time to scull with your hands and try to make your way over past an eddy line where there's calm water. But man, there's so many stories of people that freak out, and the swim doesn't kill them. It's a heart attack, right? A heart attack will kill you while you're swimming, because you can't keep a clear mind. So it's a tragedy every single time that type of thing happens.
Wow. Gosh, that's I wouldn't have thought of that. Like, you talking about getting your limbs lodged, like just coming to that edge of that infinity pool, and you're right, you're almost panicked, trying to get your feet in and trying to find grip in the river and get to the shore, but realizing that you're not going to make the edge, and you could catch a leg in between those rocks. And you're right, that current or that river does not care about your limbs. And boy, you thought you were in a bad situation before. Now you've got a busted limb and you're headed down, or worse yet, trapped. And I know, like on that wilderness adventure we went on the Big Float in Alaska, like, sweepers were a major problem out there. The trees that would fall over and then be halfway across the river, and the rapids would go down into it. Like those sweepers are really dangerous in those coastal rivers and those Alaska rivers as well, getting hung up in those. But I like what you said, and we actually had a guy that passed away here in town, and he didn't keep himself in the best health or anything, but he jumped off the bridge and gave himself a heart attack. Like that cold water shock, or that panic, killed him before he could swim to shore. It wasn't that he drowned or anything like that. So, to your point of having a heart attack, keeping yourself calm, cool, and collected, and trying to think and get yourself out of that situation. You just you can't panic. And the best way to not panic is to be prepared for those situations, to think about those before they happen and what you'll do in that situation, to have these conversations like we're having, where you think about these things and you think about worst case scenario, because man, it could just be a fun afternoon float, and all of a sudden, it turns into real danger. In fact, like my wife's sister, her husband was out salmon fishing with his dad, and somehow they got their boat had flipped, and they were trying to make it back into the boat, and his dad ended up passing away from exhaustion. He couldn't get him in the boat, and they were just like on an afternoon salmon fishing trip, like somewhere around the Columbia or a bay or edge of the ocean or something of that nature. So that stuff happens so quick, and so I think, like, having your go bag like you're talking about, and being prepared, some extra clothes, just be thinking about those worst case scenarios, because man, it like I've said 3 times in this podcast, it happens really quick.
Yeah, spot on. Absolutely spot on.
Yeah, cool. Well, I bet you're looking forward to some fishing there in Utah, huh?
Well, something, I got here 2 months ago, moving from the East Coast, and I drive the Provo Canyon every single day. And even now in the middle of winter, and it's been a mild winter, there's guys out here and they're crushing it every single day with fly rods. And I'm primarily a spin fisherman, and I screwed around with tenkara and fly fishing, but I'm excited to get out here because I need a new hobby, and I'm not patting myself on the back or anything, but I got really, really good at spin fishing on the Northeast. And it got to the point where during COVID, COVIDcation, whatever you want to call it, I was bringing home fish every single day, and I love eating fish. My girlfriend loves eating fish. And she's like, that's it. You got to stop bringing home fish. We have a whole freezer full of fish. And she goes, you're only allowed to bring them home if they're like 18 inches or over now, right? And because the legal limit in Connecticut was 12 inches at the time. So I was like, fine. They have to be over 18 inches. So I go out that morning and I catch one that was 18 and a quarter and one that was 18 and a half. And she's like, damn it, I should have said they have to be at least 20 inches. So I'm excited to get out here and do some fly fishing. And we actually at FieldCraft have a local fly rod maker making us custom fly rods with our logo and a multi-cam fly reel seat that are totally sick. And I told the retail manager downstairs, I was like, all right, I know you've already sold a few. I'm like, I want serial number 007. Why? Because I'm a total nerd, and I just want that serial number. So I'm going to get that one in OD green, serial number 007, and I'm going to take that to the river and hopefully have some fun over here with the rest of the Utah anglers.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, it's such a fun endeavor. It's such an adventure like that. Even the I think it's the Green or the Provo or whichever one. I think they both come down there and join. That's beautiful floats through that canyon. But the fun thing, spinner fishing, you get really good at reading water, swinging your spinner through those big runs of like a steady speed, a steady like depth in there. Fly fishing is really fun. It seems like you get you almost get more in tune with your environment, more in tune with the hatches that are going on, more in tune. Like fish eat those spinners and they eat them for bait fish, but they really eat them for the vibration in the water that it creates. They're able to pick up spinners by their lateral line and they're able to feel that pulse, and that's what they'll eat on, And fly fishing, like you're able to key into these trout and what they really like to eat as far as hatches, and then you get all this excitement like top water, and then if you can hit, like, to watch a fish come up and eat a dry fly is so fun. But then if you start to get into these big hatches, these salmon flies and these grasshoppers, like the biggest fish in the river will hunt for these big dry flies, and these dry flies, like a salmon fly up here can be a 3-inch dry fly. Like the trout put on a lot of their weight per year hunting these big dry flies, and these fish, they get tucked in the bank lines, and it's a real technical way of fishing. As you're floating down in a drift boat, you get one chance to put that drift in the right spot on the bank line 2 inches from the brush and not snag your fly and bust off or not be too far out, but right on that seam, and then get your men's in it and fish it down. And when it goes down and all of a sudden that fish comes up and he's that great big, 20, 24-inch fish, I mean, he eats it like a shark eating a seal, explodes on your bug, and then you're fish on, and like then it comes down to like all your experience being able to land a big healthy fish like that that'll pull hard. He's acrobatic. He'll make runs upstream, and it's you and your buddy that's rowing, if you're in a boat, trying to position and then get him to where you can get him in the net. It's so exciting and so thrilling, and you go from that to streamer fishing and predatory fish, and you'll fish a streamer a lot like you fish a spinner. You'll swing it through big holes, and streamers are fun because you're hunting for those biggest fish in the river, the 22 to 26 that are lying in there, and then when you hook them, it's absolute chaos. So you're in for a real treat being out west here. If you make it up to north, up to Montana, like I've got a drift boat up here, and you should take a run up here this summer. You're like 6 hours away. We should do a little fishing.
I am 100% taking you up on that. 100%.
All right, it's a deal for sure. Well, Kevin, I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I thank you for your expertise in survival. Like, you made so many good points today, and it's really good for our audience to visit this, because a lot of times, we're not the best at preparing for worst case scenario. Like you say, we always think about best case scenario. We dream about catching that fish or having that great day, and a lot of times we forget about a lot of the safety out there. So I just think this was such an important conversation to have.
Well, I appreciate you having me on there. And like I said before, if you take the time and you do everything right in terms of planning for worst case scenario, it will allow you to enjoy that best case scenario when it does happen, right? So I just hope the listeners enjoyed this, and hopefully they don't just, listen and it's in one ear and out the other. We didn't get into this for making money. We're truly into this for improving people's preparedness, because, we want to take care of good Americans. And, I hope that the listeners are more prepared because of this. And if they have any questions, they can always reach out. We're very approachable. You can email me at estela@fieldcraftsurvival.com or on Instagram at EstelaWildEd, and I respond to all messages. So happy to help out.
Oh, thanks so much. It was really good to connect with you, and just good. I think getting this information out there is going to help prepare people and might help people avoid that situation altogether. Just thinking about it and being prepared, I just think you can save yourself a lot of headache or save yourself from getting in that bad scenario. So yeah, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Fun conversation with Kevin. I know that's a bit different from a lot of the fly fishing content, but I think it's super important and relevant for us Western fly fishermen. So, yeah, awesome conversation. Definitely makes me think about things. Been adventuring on new rivers here lately, and absolutely all in. But, doing some of these floats at different flows, they can just be different rivers. The lower the flow is, the more rocks are exposed and the more tacking around you have to do to get through these rapids and things. And then, in the bigger floats, there's just so much water. It could be so powerful. And then just some of the other dangers that are around. So definitely makes me think about things, and got to keep it safe out there. So been having a ton of fun. The spring has been great fishing. I got a podcast I'm putting together with my buddy Dylan. We did that with that wall tent camp and went for 3 days and went and fished hard, and from daylight till dark chasing big brown trout, and timed it right. They were eating, and caught some nice ones. Like you say, my personal best of the year. Just an absolutely awesome trip. So I want to recap that. Headed out this weekend, going to go throw dry flies. You guys have probably heard me talk about those squalla hatches that happen early in Montana. So traveling to the western side of the state, and going to go try to find some hatches and see if I can't catch fish on a dry fly. So we'll see, but should be a riot. So man, I'm just such a great time of the year. I love springtime for getting out. So I've had a bunch of adventures, and need to sit down, do a solo as well, and just share some of the insight into springtime fishing. But yeah, it's just a great time of the year to be out. So thanks to you guys for the support. Thanks to Kevin for his time being on the podcast, and everybody over there at FieldCraft Survival. And thanks to you guys for listening in. This is a new venture for me, and it's a new lane, and so just trying to make this have interesting podcasts that you guys can get information out of that helps make you a better Western fly fisherman, and also sharing the adventure. So just trying to find my niche here and build an audience. And so I'd really like to see this podcast succeed, and thanks to you guys for listening in each and every week. It really helps. So with that, I'm going to pack my bags for some fishing here and get this podcast out to you guys, and I'll check in with you guys here in a couple weeks.